Sometime in the early 2010s, this diagram was posted to the internet and has since become a classic meme within the fashion community. This image depicts an altered version of the 9 Circles of Hell from Dante Alighieri's 14th century epic poem, Divine Comedy, where each level is instead annotated with different brands or designers. The deeper you venture, the more obscure they get. The first 7 circles mainly consist of mainstream or very entry-level fashion, but once you cross into the 8th circle, things start to get very niche very quickly. At this point, many self-described fashion enjoyers would start to see brands and designers that they've never heard of, and this will only increase the further you descend. Eventually, you reach the bottom, and only one designer dwells at this depth of obscurity: Carol Christian Poell. Despite lacking certain brands and being outdated a decade after its creation, many would agree that Carol Christian Poell still deserves his place at the bottom of the fashion inferno. He is the quintessential avant garde designer and is known for his uncompromising and extremely experimental designs, which incorporate exceptional tailoring and artisanal techniques. He has built a reputation of shrouded mystery that many celebrities could only dream of replicating, and mastered a level of privacy that would make Frank Ocean look like a lifestyle vlogger. There are only a few published interviews with Poell and only a handful of photos of him on the internet, none of which are confirmed to actually be him. This alleged picture of him looks eerily similar to this man I often see in my dreams, so I've decided to wojackify him for the sake of this video. He is currently based in Milan's Naviglio district and only comes out with products when he feels like it, completely disregarding the spring, summer, autumn, winter release format that the rest of the industry strictly adheres to. Carol Christian Poell was born in 1966 into a family of leather makers in Linz, Austria. By the age of 15, he was picking up his family's craft while also beginning to make garments due to the influence of his stepfather, who worked in a clothing factory. He would go on to study tailoring in Vienna and then later enroll at Milan's Domus Academy, where he would receive his master's in fashion design. This is where he established CCP SRL in partnership with Sergio Simone in 1995. In the same year, Poell released his first collection called the Unintended Collection, which only consisted of a jacket, a shirt, and a pair of trousers. The following season, he released his first full collection titled the First Intended Collection. Despite coming up with the most uninspiring names for these releases, this collection was received positively, including by the then creative director of Chanel, Karl Lagerfeld, who would later describe Poell as a marvellous man and say how he'd bought and worn many CCP clothes. Poell became known as the most researched designer in fashion, which largely referred to his process of experimentation and meticulous clothing production techniques. For example, for the AM2590 titanium arthrosic gloves, Poell inserted each individual zipper tooth one by one. This would seem extremely unnecessary to nearly everyone, including most designers. Still, this sort of masochistic approach to garment construction is what would earn Poell such a good reputation within the fashion community. In 1999, Poell released his first attempt at women's clothing. This collection was initially intended for men, but he started to feel like these recent designs weren't cohesive with previous CCP menswear collections. The most iconic moment in Poell's career would take place on the Naviglio Grande Canal in Milan during the sweltering Italian summer of 2003. The press, fashion enthusiasts, and the general public gathered on a bridge without any idea of what this fashion show would entail. Poell just told them to congregate there. After some time, they started to notice individual items of clothing floating down the canal, which was then followed by models who resembled corpses wearing full CCP. Despite the clothing in this collection being somewhat tame compared to later releases from Poell, this show became legendary for not just his career but in fashion as a whole, and is a quintessential example of anti-fashion. Titled Mainstream Downstream, this performative presentation of clothes was Poell's way of commenting on the current state of the fashion industry. Mainstream fashion functions as a mechanism fueled by trends to pump out clothes for the masses to wear. This whole system is orchestrated by the industry as a means to an end, with the end being a ton of money. Poell also rejects the focus on people by the fashion industry, which is likely due to that also being used as a tactic to push mass consumption of clothes. When people see their favourite celebrities or models wearing certain garments, they are far more likely to purchase those items, and fashion brands are very aware of this. This likely played into his choice to use models presented as corpses in this show, as it subverts the industry norm of trying to sell an idealized image of a person that the audience could theoretically become if they just buy into the brand. For many people, this unconventional and macabre fashion show alone would already put Poell at the top of their edgy motherfucker list. Well, you're all in for a treat because it's only ramping up from here on out. In 2010, CCP released two of their most famous collections, which were made to oppose each other. Self-Edge consisted of clothes that were made with salvaged fabric, with all the seams of these clothes being glued together. This method of construction takes quadruple the amount of fabric usually needed to construct a normal garment. As a result, the clothes from this series are notoriously rigid and sturdy. This often restricts the wearer's movement and in some cases inflicts pain. Juxtaposing this was the Dead End series. The clothes in this collection were characterized by seams only being held together by tape and light chain stitching. This makes the garments look like they could easily pull themselves apart, and surprise surprise, that is exactly what these garments have a reputation for doing. This quote from one of the few interviews with Poell gives us a bit of insight into why he would create clothes like this. "I do not think of dress as a complement to the body, rather I seek to annul the body. Actually, I consider it only a volume and a three-dimensional form." Simply put, Poell doesn't give a fuck about the people wearing his clothes. He is purely focused on creating individual garments with artisanal techniques, and everything else, including durability and comfort, is completely disregarded. The garment's existence and purpose is above simply serving the user. The clothes don't fall apart because they were made poorly, they fall apart because that is the garment's response to you wearing it. 99% of people would definitely see this as a scam, but ultimately this is what you're signing up for when you buy CCP products, and considering how ridiculously niche this brand is, I doubt anyone is blindly buying into this fashion label. Each item from CCP is meant to be a standalone thing. As a designer, Poell's focus is not on creating an overall look, style or coherence between his clothes. Yes, you can argue that it's visually obvious when you're looking at a CCP garment, so this brand must have style in some form. However, I think this is just a byproduct of Poell's artisanal side, as he is obsessed with meticulous technique, unconventional materials and outlandish experimentation, and that is what makes up the brand's DNA. To illustrate this better, let's compare CCP to the work of Rick Owens, who is also known for being controversial and being an outsider of sorts in the context of the fashion industry. Both designers make divisive clothes, but Rick Owens' pieces are designed to be worn and styled with other Rick Owens garments. Yes, many people do incorporate his clothes into outfits mixed with other brands, but the general consensus is that these garments look better when styled with more, if not full Rick. CCP is not trying to sell you a lifestyle, which is generally what most brands, even outside of fashion, do to gain loyal customers. This is an example of how CCP embodies anti-fashion even through how they do business. The work speaks for itself. He doesn't need to obey the unwritten rules of running a clothing business. For the next portion of the video, I'm going to go through CCP's most grotesque and weird pieces. In true YouTube slop content fashion, I've decided to organise them into a tier list. Just to clarify, these are ranked by how weird and controversial they are, and not by which I think is the best or coolest. In D tier, we have the fake pregnant bag. This one is just a bit weird and there's not much to say about it. It makes you look pregnant. In C tier, we have the human hair tie. Imagine growing your hair out for years to find out it ended up on the chest of some minted CSM student. The supplier who sourced the hair for Poell must be reliable, because the next two entries are the human hair knit pullover and the human hair sleeveless jacket. The idea of being wrapped in some random person's hair is just slightly odd to me, but each their own I guess. Next we have the bag made of a pig in its entirety. To be honest, I don't think that this one is that ridiculous. Taxidermy isn't that much of a taboo, but people online seem to think this bag is quite controversial, so I'm just trying to account for my own bias I guess. This piece comments on the fashion industry's use of animal products and makes a good point. If you're okay with wearing leather products, then you should be fine with this bag. In B tier, we have the object-dyed leather encased horse. This is pretty much the same as the pig bag, just slightly more extreme. I think this was an installation for a showroom, but I am not completely sure, so take that with a grain of salt. Next, we have jewellery made with human teeth. This is just yucky. Like, whose teeth are these? Alright, time to ramp things up a bit. In A tier, we have the bull's blood dyed pigskin trousers. Poell said he did this to bring life back to the leather. Ironically, these garments would end up rotting due to the use of blood. Next we have this knitted pullover, which at a glance doesn't seem very strange until you find out that it's made of pig intestines.
Hell no!
And finally, in S tier, we have this fencing jacket. You'll notice that the leather has this strange veining effect. This was achieved by injecting the live animal with dye before it was slaughtered for the leather.
Hell no!
I think Poell took it a bit too far with this one. However, in a world where people don't have to confront the ugly side of the animal-based products they consume, this jacket proudly shows the suffering of the animal instead of just sweeping it under the rug. Yeah, Poell really shouldn't have done this, but if this does piss you off, then it does raise the question, why do you only care when the animal's suffering is shown to you? I mean, shit like this exists, which is what puts this on your plate. Something I haven't seen anyone talk about regarding the work of Carol Christian Poell is that it can often come across as quite contradictory. I am not referring to the interpretation of his work that focuses on dichotomies. If you want to learn more about that, you should watch this video by Carson Craning where he discusses this in depth. It's a great video, and a fly even hovers over its head towards the end, which is very on brand for someone talking about archive fashion.
Archived fashion, the tribe of smelly garment wearers.
The contradiction I'm referring to is mainly in the explanations behind the work of CCP. An example of this would be how his first women's collection came about after he converted design work from a collection initially intended for men. He said he did this because it wasn't cohesive with his previous menswear collections. However, in the same interview, he also claimed that his focus with this collection was on the garments individually and would also over-dramatically call this process the trilogy. This refers to the whole thing of him focusing on each garment as an individual thing and completely disregarding everything else, including overall looks and styles. If that was his process of designing clothes, then why did he care that it wasn't cohesive with previous collections? I find it interesting that Poell has only discussed this publicly once in a contradictory manner, yet it has become a defining characteristic of CCP. Within the same interview, he goes on to explain how he doesn't consider the body when creating clothes and in fact wishes to annul it. If he sought to annul the body, then would that not include gender too? So what's the point of converting the collection into specifically a woman's one if he supposedly wants to invalidate the body anyway? The points I'm making kind of make it sound like I'm somehow angry that CCP started making women's clothing. That is not the case, don't worry girlies, you go on and wear your blood-covered pigskin trousers. Again, I just find it interesting that people define Poell's whole body of work based on these few public explanations, even though he seems to contradict them in the same interviews. Maybe all this conceptual stuff is just bullshit he made up to enable his obsession with grotesque experimentation and artisanal techniques. It could all just be an ironic joke. I mean, it's not like he hasn't made ironic products before, and I think it would be strangely poetic that the edgiest and most obscure fashion designer was taking the piss out of his audience via the products this whole time. I'm not saying I actually believe his theory at all, but still, this guy has deliberately made clothes so fragile that they are known for falling apart after very little wear, while also creating jackets so sturdy that they hurt the wearer, or trousers that don't allow you to sit down and force you to learn a new way to walk. Despite this, he adamantly claimed during an interview that he has no intentions of making works of art and that he's a fashion designer focused on, quote, making real clothes with a series of artisan techniques. He is a trained tailor and fashion designer, so he is definitely capable of making comfortable and durable clothing, but actively choosing not to do so can only really be explained through some sort of artistic or conceptual approach. Poell discusses artistic concepts, but he will also turn around and firmly say he is not an artist in the same interview. In so many ways, the contradictions, vagueness, and obscurity of it all make the idea of it all being satire seem like a possibility. I know there are going to be some CCP elitists watching this who are about to comment something like, "You simpleton, these aren't contradictions, you just can't comprehend the duality of blah 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 blah," and yeah, that may be your or someone else's interpretation that you've copied and pasted into your opinion, and great, good for you. But is it too hard to believe that all while you were pretentiously judging other people's fashion choices from atop your object-dyed leather-encased high horse, you were actually the butt end of a joke made by the very person who sold you your £2,200 overlocked vest bag? No matter what Poell decides to release on whatever schedule he likes for whatever price he sees fit, there will always be some edgy motherfucker who's going to buy it. This is almost unheard of for any brand, especially in the digital era where brands have to constantly market themselves to stay relevant and get customers. CCP, on the other hand, almost seem like they are trying to drive attention away from them. The official website literally doesn't load and the Instagram page is private. I find it very interesting that Poell does not consider himself to be an artist purely because, according to him, the concepts come as a secondary thing and making real clothes come first. There are a few examples of this being just straight up bullshit, like with the pig intestines sweater. From a purely fashion design focused perspective, what practical use is there for using a material like that, if not for a conceptual purpose? I also personally think that even if the conceptual side of his work is secondary, then that doesn't make him not an artist. Does a painter who makes their own canvases not count as an artist just because the conceptual part of their job comes after the more artisanal process of hand making something purely for its function? Again, I just want to reiterate that I am not trying to claim that irony is the true meaning behind CCP. When we're dealing with the levels of edginess and obscurity that comes with subjects such as Carol Christian Poell, I think it's important not to take everything too seriously, especially when there is very little information available about the man and his work. It is just fun to theorise about these sorts of things, and when there are elitists involved, it's also kind of funny to clown on them a bit. Ignoring the conceptual theories, philosophies, and I guess the ethics of some of his clothes, we can all at least agree his design work is unparalleled and his craftsmanship is exceptional. Anyway, if you're tired of disgusting British vocal fry and still want to learn more without having to sift through the 707-page CCP forum on the Style Zeitgeist website, then as I said earlier, I highly recommend checking out this video by Carsten Craning. He more eloquently discusses interpretations of Poell's work, rather than just yapping the way I have in this video. David Mozia also makes a lot of great content surrounding CCP and actually owns a lot of the clothes from the brand, so if you're interested in a specific piece, there's a high chance he has a video showing, discussing and reviewing it. That's the end of the video, goodbye.